Atheist Alliance International podcast with Andy Phillips.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hi and welcome to the Atheist Alliance International podcast with me, Andy Phillips, and today we've got a really packed show. Later I'll be talking to historian, author and blogger Jason Sylvester. Now the Bible is a fascinating ancient document. It's used by the religious as a roadmap for every aspect of their lives and steers their beliefs and opinions. This is all predicated on the words within that document as being the inherent word of God. In other words, it's true and without error. But in recent years, there's a new breed of archaeologists that has emerged, taking a fresh look at the history of the Holy Land and the stories and the processional narrative of the Bible, and holding that against what we actually know happened. And this is really, really important because as late as the 1950s and 60s, archaeologists have been marching into the Holy Land with a spade in one hand and a Bible in the other, and trying desperately to fit the archaeological evidence to the supposed history within the Bible. But Jason Sylvester is going to be on hand to guide us through to the truth behind those biblical stories. So don't miss that. It's going to be really, really enlightening. Now, I just want to introduce my very first guest. And this is Andy Pakula. And Andy is a non-theistic minister in New Unity, which is a non-religious church in London. And you're an atheist minister, isn't that right, Andy?
That is correct, my friend Andy. Nice to meet you.
Andy. That's what I was just saying. Andy's in this world. I've got to change my name. It's really interesting. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I sort of reached out to you in the first place, because I just find it very interesting that you're an atheist minister in a non-religious church. So tell me the background.
It is really interesting, right? And my background should never have taken me here. So I began life in a fairly atheistic Jewish household that did some of the rituals but never believed in anything supernatural as far as I could tell, including my grandparents never seemed to believe in anything supernatural. And I went off and became a scientist. I only believe things I can prove or can't easily disprove. And I was absolutely convinced that anything that looked like religion at all was evil, and only for the weak, right? That this is, religion is the crutch that you use if you can't get by in any other way, because those of us who could succeed in the real world of business, and we could go out and we'd be fine without any sort of crutch like that. And in my 30s, when I became a father, and my wife and I had a 2-year-old baby, we lived in a town where we didn't really know very many people, if anyone. And we started thinking, living in the US at the time, where people do religion, they still do religion, as opposed to here in the UK, where it's a real minority activity, where 5% of the population or something do religion. Over there, half the population does religion, so it didn't seem abnormal to want to find some place. So we started asking around, where can two nice atheist parents and their proto-atheist child go to find community and find values? And people generally said the Unitarians down the street. There were 2 Unitarian Universalist congregations in our town. We went to the closest one, and I was both terrified by the prospect of somebody dosing me with religion, supernaturalism. I was terrified by the idea of going into a church, since even though my family wasn't religious, I can imagine my ancestors rotating at very high speed in their graves if I did such a thing. And also I didn't want the kind of conservatism that I know exists in churches, quote unquote churches. So we went to this close by Unitarian Universalist congregation. Minister was a woman, So I thought, oh, okay, the patriarchy part, it's not a problem. And her surname was Cohen. I thought my ancestors would be comforted by that. And she didn't mention God. So it passed the test that made it palatable, not attractive for me, but palatable. And I had been raised as a consumerist, a materialist, right? The goal in life is to make money, have a house in the suburbs, have 2.2 children, and have prestige. When I went to this place, where we were only there for our child, I started to recognize there was actually more to life. I recognized that, for one thing, that compassion actually matters, that we can make connections with people that are much deeper than the sort we have in our day-to-day lives, that when we have a place where we feel safe to be vulnerable, kind of amazing things can happen. And probably my most transformative experience was being one of the leaders of the youth group. This is 14 to 18-year-olds. And I was absolutely terrified to have anything to do with teenagers first. But I got roped into it because they needed somebody just for one outing. And the teens really ran the group, and they created and conducted activities that were immensely vulnerable, where they were really sharing the most painful and joyous parts of their lives and supporting each other completely. It was something I had never been part of before in my life. And I thought, oh, wait a second, there's something more, right? There's really something more. This actually matters. It's not about supernatural. It's about humanity. It's about connection. It's about what we can do for each other, how much stronger we are together, and the fact that we are interdependent. So,
I just think it's really interesting because it's, these are a lot of the things that I believe in. I mean, it's I don't go to church. Obviously, I'm an atheist. I went to church when I was a kid.
I lead church, and I'm an atheist. So.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Yeah,
it's so interesting. But when I was a child, I used to go to church, and the part that I actually liked was the community part. Where you could go and see your friends and talk to people, and you felt part of something and things like that. And the thing I didn't like was listening to sermons, and in my head, every single time I was listening to a sermon, I was thinking that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
So I was always questioning that, and obviously asking questions of my local vicar, who got immensely pissed off with me very, very quickly. And I think this is the sort of interesting aspect of it, because this is humanity, this is humanitarianism, this is humanist values and things like that. So I know that you abide by the this Unitarianism or the universalism in the Unitarian principles and things like that. What is it that is that the thing that's like driving the church? Or do you call it a church?
So we only say church if we precede it with non-religious.
Right. Okay.
Right. So it's only if there's that cognitive dissonance. Otherwise, we call it a congregation, or we just call it New Unity.
New Unity.
So no, those principles are not central at all. The only thing that's really central for us is being radically inclusive and working for love and justice in the world, right? And in ourselves. So the fact that we are Unitarian is almost an accident, in the sense that we could be nothing and just be just the same.
You wouldn't have to be under an umbrella.
No. However, the congregation stems from two original congregations that were established in 1667 and 1708, which is incredible. And the only reason that they were able to evolve into what we are now is because they had the foresight, or the accidental foresight, or the luck, to make themselves democratic, non-hierarchical, not under anybody else's control, and non-creedal, so that they never said, this is what we believe in, we will always believe in it. And they never allowed created a bishop or a cardinal or a pope to say what to do, what to believe. And so every congregation was free to go its own way. And as a biologist, right, that's evolution. That's what gives, so all the variation between those should, in principle, select for the best. And we've grown, and I think that suggests we have some selective advantage. I won't say that we're the best, but something we're doing is right, and it speaks to younger people, a range of people from teens to 90s. We're the largest congregation in the British Unitarian movement. We're doing a lot of good work in the world. We're helping people to become the best version of themselves. Something's working. But I would say, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
Okay, so I mean, I would say people, right? As I had to live 3 decades before discovering, people need community, right? And especially a kind of deep community where they can be themselves, and that's incredibly powerful. And those people, if they are also doing things in the world, that just seems like the best combination, right? So I would love to see groups of all kinds creating community and doing good things in the world, right? I'm leading a separate charity that is a charity that's bringing people together and doing good things in the world. I've talked to other groups that are essentially, they have an aim about the environment, but they're trying to build community together. And I wonder if that, there are probably lots of models for what will provide community to people once religion is no longer, now that religion is no longer the dominant means of providing community, because certainly that's gone for most people. How do we meet those needs? And how do we find what's important in our lives, what gives our lives meaning, what gives our lives purpose, and I believe that is helping others. But how do we focus on helping others and figure out how to help others, and what things we ought to work on, and who we're going to work with? And when you combine helping other people and those values and purpose and community, I think that's the sweet spot. And I think there will be lots and lots of different ways that those needs are met into the future.
Why do you think I mean, you say you're the largest. Is there a lot of these sort of congregations around the UK?
Yeah, there's about 160 in the UK.
Right.
In the US, there are over 1,000, and the average size is about 10 times bigger over there.
Right.
And so it represents about the same fraction of the congregation attending population, which is still a very small fraction. But they're really tiny here, which is very problematic for their success.
What do you think that is? Is it just that people don't know about it?
I think it's complicated. I think it has to do with diminishing size leads to less of an ability to change and grow and evolve, and failure to grow and evolve leads to decreasing size, and you spiral downwards. So they tend to be very small and elderly congregations, very hard hole to get out of.
Right.
I
mean, and also, I mean, we know for a fact that there's a lot of people who go to church who aren't believers.
No, they're not.
They
Absolutely
don't
not.
actually believe in
Yeah,
God. They
yeah,
go to church because of
yeah,
community. Do you
yeah.
think this would be a better alternative for those people
I
if they
think
knew
that's a
about
great
it?
question. I think the world is divided into people who feel that they must be authentic in everything they say, right? People like me, where I don't want to sing a Christmas carol that says Jesus is the Son of God or something,
Mhm.
right? I can't bear it. There's plenty of people who don't mind that, right? Plenty of people who can sit through the sermon in a real church or a synagogue or a mosque, whatever, and don't believe any of it. And they go, yeah, it just kind of flows over them. I can't do that. And I know there are other people like me who can't do that.
Mm.
But there is something that divides us into those two groups. So I think there are people who are perfectly happy going to a Christian church or a synagogue or a mosque who don't believe what they're hearing, but they recognize that that's not the important thing.
Sure.
And that's fine. I ran into a guy, a Hasidic Jew, and how did we get onto this? I said, oh, I was raised Jewish, but you wouldn't agree I'm Jewish because I'm an atheist. He said, oh, I'm an atheist. I'm like, you are a Hasidic Jew. Do you not get it? And he said, no, that isn't what's important to me.
I know I've had conversations with
Yeah.
Jewish people that actually when I first started going down the road of actually going out and talking to
Yeah.
other people in the atheist community, I lived in a little bubble, my own little
Yeah.
bubble of life, and the more I spoke to people about different aspects of faith and God and everything else to do with any of this, because it does interest me. I didn't even realize that there were people, for instance, within the Jewish community that would go to a synagogue quite happily,
Yeah.
but state they are atheists and they don't have any belief in God. And I didn't quite understand that. I do now because I've had
Yeah.
long
Yeah.
conversations with people. But it's also weird having conversations with friends and acquaintances of mine over the years, and realizing that a lot of people who staunchly go to a Catholic church, take their child to a Catholic church, don't actually believe in God, and probably aren't really that good a Catholic anyway. But they go there because of the school.
Right. Oh, that yes, in this country, that is absolutely true. But some of them go because they think there is some kind of goodness there, in
Well, there's
addition to
value in
community,
isn't
right?
there? There's always
Values,
value
yeah,
in community.
yeah. And Catholics, for whatever uh, their negatives may be, they've done amazingly good social justice work in the world, right? They've been terrific in a lot of ways, because in their faith, it's more about what you do than what you're saved by acts, by deeds, not by belief.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's because the Catholic Church is full of human beings. They've done a lot of pretty atrocious things as well. So
Absolutely. Well, who hasn't? Who hasn't?
yeah, exactly,
Except
exactly.
you and
So
me. Yeah,
the
because we're
the
angels.
concepts of the church or the congregation.
Yeah.
I've been looking through some of this stuff because it is the first time I actually really sort of seen any of this stuff. I didn't really know anything about it before. We had a chat a little while ago.
Yeah.
And well, I want to talk about the concepts of the 7 principles and the 6 sources. Could you just give us a bit of a rundown of what that is? And I know you said you don't really adhere to all of that.
Yeah. So that's somewhat central to the Unitarian Universalists in the States. It's not part of British Unitarianism. And essentially, what happened years and years ago, I don't remember what year, is they decided, well, we can't decide what we believe, but we can decide what we kind of most hold to be important, most of us, right? And they created these 7 principles, and they said, okay, and in addition, we draw wisdom from where, right? And so then they came up with 6 sources. The 7 principles essentially are everybody matters. The world is interconnected, nature and humanity and so on. And we should use our conscience. We should use the democratic process. There's a couple others in there. I think most of them all collapse into two, which is interconnection and everybody matters.
Yeah.
And the sources are, the Judeo-Christian tradition, which has probably been modified at this point to include the Islamic tradition, there's sort of a pagan-y kind of naturalistic source, and literature and art, humanity, right? So it aims to capture everything. So it's like we draw wisdom from everywhere that says everybody matters, and we're all interconnected. And if we're all interconnected and everybody matters, we should be democratic. We should have the right to think for ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very hard to argue with. I mean, there's nothing in there that you can argue with. Right?
No,
I mean,
no. The only thing that I sort of, when I was going through them, I did pick up a few things, as when you're researching things, you sort of go, I need to ask about that.
Yeah.
But you sort of answered one of them, which was in the sources, it says Jewish and Christian teachings.
Yeah.
It didn't mention Islam. But I guess that is something which is.
They probably hadn't heard of Muslims when they wrote this.
Right.
It was a while ago.
Right. Okay.
And they looked at revising them, but it had to be a vote. And people basically said, nah, let's not revise them. They went to a lot of effort to set up to revise them and so on.
It's just that within Atheist Alliance International, we tend to deal with quite a few people who are ex-Muslims.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of something on my mind.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen a faith yet that doesn't have some bad teachings and some good teachings, right? I mean, I never valued the Jewish tradition until I went to a Christian seminary to be trained to be a minister, as an atheist minister, and discovered the Hebrew prophets part of the Bible, which was all about justice, which is like the widow and the orphan, and forget about your rituals, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an overflowing stream. That's great stuff, and those guys are talking about social justice, and so did Jesus, so and the Buddha talks about caring for each other, the Bodhisattva path, and and every one of them has something bad too, right?
Yeah.
Let's smite them all.
Principles, then I guess the underlying principles of the congregation and what you're trying to do is taking the good things from every human source that you can possibly find. Really, anything that you think has got compassion, justice, and all the things that we all, hopefully most of us, let's say, but try and live by and work by. But putting it into a place and a time, I guess that's really what the congregation is all about. It's like there's a place and a time when you can enjoy that as a group, I guess. Yeah,
and also other times to create small groups and other kinds of programs that will help people to become their best selves, to learn, to organize, to work for justice in the world. I mean, when it is true that I am very willing to draw from everywhere, but I'm also very selective.
Mm-hmm.
There are a whole lot of things in every religious source that I want nothing to do with, right? And I think it's up to us and our reason and our intelligence and our discernment to figure out what's right. I think most of the stuff you come upon in terms of teachings and stories serve as nice examples, right? Just like a made up story, because They are made up stories. But stories are powerful, right? We know stories are super powerful. And the people who are so into Harry Potter, the people who are so into Star Wars, the people like me who are so into Star Trek, right? Those are such moving and powerful stories. It's not just religious texts that do that. And in fact, they don't do it as well because they don't have special effects. They don't have modern language. For my money, I'd say Star Trek is probably my best scripture. The original series, of course, but yeah,
Of course.
naturally, yeah.
So, I mean, you get people who are believers in the congregation. So, how does that actually work?
Very few, but we don't. So we don't cater to believers. We also don't have any need to say what you believe isn't true, right? So I'm not going to attack someone for believing. All I care about is how we act in the world, right? Whether we're loving, whether we're compassionate, whether we work for justice and to help other people, right? That's what matters. And ultimately, if you do that because God said so, yeah, okay, that's all right. Don't try to convince anybody else of that, but that's fine. We can work together.
It's much
Yeah,
better to actually have this come from yourself rather
yeah,
than doing something because someone else tells you if you
I-
don't, this will happen.
yeah. But I think, to be fair, none of us creates our own morality ourselves, right? We are all a product of the culture in which we grow, and so there are aspects of what I think that came from Christianity because it's in the water, right? And so to some extent, I can't help that, and you can't help that, and none of us can. It's a book I've been meaning to read about how Christianity is so embedded in our culture, and it probably is. And there, hopefully, I'm taking the good things from that, and hopefully I'm filtering that through the wisdom of human connection and filtering it through the notion that kindness has to come first and compassion has to always be present and love is really the answer. But if I'd grown up in a culture that was infused with Taoist teaching, I'd be saying somewhat different things. I hope it would come to the same end, but I can't know that. We're creatures of our culture too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen, Andy, you're a really interesting guy.
Thank
I've
you.
loved speaking to you, and I'm really glad I've met you. Could you just give us a little bit of, or tell us where the church is, the
Sure.
non-religious church,
Yep.
the congregation is?
Yes. So for the most part, in this pandemic, we are at www.new-unity.org. We have two buildings. The famous one is on Newington Green, which is N16. And it is the place where Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother of feminism, attended, at least sometimes, and where Thomas Jefferson visited, and Benjamin Franklin visited, and Tom Paine. It was a real hothouse of revolution in the 18th century. A really cool place that's just been renovated, and someday when this pandemic ends, we'll all be able to crowd in there and do whatever we want to do.
Well, I guarantee you, when this
Yeah.
pandemic does end, I'll come
Yeah.
down and I'll see you.
Cool. In the meantime, we are on Zoom every Sunday morning, and there's lots of programs that are available online as well. And I think our Zoom offering is pretty good. We're getting about 65 connections a Sunday, and people seem to really enjoy it. So that's a nice thing.
Well, I'll put a link to the to your site on this
Fantastic.
podcast. So, if people want to have a look at that.
Yeah.
Andy, thanks for joining us
Wonderful.
today. It's been absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great. And I look forward to talking to you again.
That was the wonderful Andy Pakula, an atheist minister. And now my next guest, Jason Sylvester. And Jason is a blogger and author. And so I think best, Jason, if you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Andy.
Lovely.
So again, my name is Jason. My blogging name is Diogenes of Mayberry. In addition to being a writer and blogger, I'm a volunteer with AAI's Atheist Support Network, and I also work as the blog manager for Atheist Alliance International. And here with Andy today for our inaugural chat on biblical history.
Yeah, we're going to sort of, what you do is you deconstruct sort of biblical stories, don't you, in a way?
Yeah. I try to look at the social, political context behind the biblical stories, particularly political nature, to deconstruct why they're not literally true as evangelical Christians believe they are.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of issue. It's this because the Bible is taken as without error by a lot of people, and they base their whole political existence on it being error-free and the Word of God.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're trying to sort of combat a little bit. Sort of, if there is errors in it, if there's any errors in it whatsoever, then what can you say is true? And I think this is really the whole point of a lot of this. It's not about just bashing the Bible or doing it, or that sort of thing. It's really just look at the Bible and sort of say, how can we trust this book? And that's really the whole point of it. So where do you want to start with this story?
I think maybe we go into the contextualization of how it sort of came together and the reasons behind that. So
Fantastic.
that starts in and around 622 BCE with the reforms of King Josiah. And for anyone watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast, so the links will be provided by Andy for any of the references that I give. So in a book by Israeli archaeologist Israel Finkelstein and historian Neil Silverman called The Bible Unearthed, they go into a lot of detail behind the origins of the stories in the Bible. What's the archaeological history? What's the textual history behind things? And so what their research uncovered was that in and around 622, during the reforms of Josiah, you see the coming together of a lot of these stories. So the creation of the patriarchal narratives, the Exodus narrative, the conquest of Canaan, and they all serve this socio-political need of Josiah and his aspirations for the conquest of not conquest, but to take the abandoned northern lands of Israel into his own southern kingdom of Judah.
Right.
The reason for doing this is there are a number of socio-political factors at play that obviously the general public and particularly the church-going public just are not aware of. They're not taught it in Sunday school. So what's going on? So we have to go back about 100 years from that to around 740 BCE, when Assyria is the regional superpower. And the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, separate kingdoms, both become vassal states within the Assyrian Empire. About 8 years later, in 732, one of the northern Israel, I'm not sure if it was a king or a general, I can't remember exactly, decides they don't want to pay tribute anymore. And of course, the Assyrians come in and utterly destroy the northern kingdom of Israel. And this correlates into the biblical story of the scattering of the 10 northern tribes, because as a policy of Assyrian imperial resettlement, it's also the later Persians do the same thing. You want to break the ties of the conquered people to their land. So you pull them out of where they are and you resettle them in other areas of your empire. And then you take those people and move them into, say, northern Israel. And there's two reasons for this. One, it breaks their ties, and two, it keeps them growing food for trade within the empire. And so you have this sort of the birth of the idea of the where God is going to have to re-enter human society and reconstitute the 12 tribes.
Right.
Now, so what happens is, but around 620, 612, Assyria is off the world stage. They're facing pressure from a rising Egypt in the west and from the Medes and the Persians in the east. Sorry, the Babylonians and the Medes in the east. So Assyria is now off the chart, or off the world stage. So these the northern kingdom of Israel is now basically fair game, because there's no one to challenge him for it in the guise of Assyria and their vassalage to the Assyrians. So it's hard to glean from reading the Bible, but the reality on the ground is Judah is barren and arid and desert-like. The northern kingdom of Israel is where all the olive vineyards were. So it's prosperous. The grounds are much better and more fertile. So he wants this land for himself. So at the same time, he wants to take control of the northern kingdom of Israel, or the former lands of the kingdom of Israel. Egypt is also rising without any threat from Assyria. And if you look on a map and you sort of picture in your mind where Israel is up along that strip as the Mediterranean is curving up. So you can picture the Fertile Crescent that goes from Egypt up along the coast and then down into modern day Iraq or Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. So that's the Fertile Crescent. So like the story of Megiddo, Armageddon, right? That's the pass from the coastal route up through the mountains and into the Fertile Crescent that goes down to Iraq. So it's a vital and strategic choke point on the Fertile Crescent. And of course, Judah wants to control it, and Egypt wants it for their own trade routes. So it becomes very strategic in the social political fight between Egypt wanting to reassert control over Canaan like he'd had back at the end of the Bronze Age, and Judah's own aspirations for empire. And so what you have is backing up again a little bit. So when Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel and deported some of the population, the remnants of that population then begin to flood as refugees down into Judah. Right. And this sort of gives the context as to why you have a lot of conflicting things in the Bible, such as two names for God, El and Yahweh, why you have two priesthoods, the Levite and the Aramid priesthood, why you have two sacrificial altars, one in Bethel and one in Jerusalem. And that's the incorporation of these northern and southern traditions. In the documentary Hypothesis, which puts forward that there are 4 separate traditions in the compilation of the Bible, 2 of them being this northern and southern tradition, the other 2 being the Deuteronomist, which is Josiah's Reformation program, and then the later priestly source, who are the editors who basically compiled everything and edited the Bible into its final form after their release from Babylonian captivity. So there's a whole lot here at work that needs to be unpacked contextually to understand what's going on. And this is what Finkelstein and Silberman do, is explain this socio-political dynamic of what's going on in the 600s. And in that, so Josiah, as part of his Reformation program, creates this grand family saga, this national epic of these stories that are projected back into the Bronze Age of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, of the patriarchs, who are the founders of both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And then the later Bronze Age tale of the captivity in Egypt, the Exodus, and the conquest of Canaan. Except, as Finkelstein and Silberman point out, there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever for an Israelite culture in the Bronze Age. These are all Iron Age legendary stories that come out of this Josianic Deuteronomistic reform in and around 622 BC to serve the purpose of Judah and their goal of wanting to stand up to the Egyptians and to have a reason why they're entitled to the lands of the northern kingdom of Israel.
So they create. So this is completely political.
Yes.
And we're talking about the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, just to sort of try and put it in perspective. But it's really sort of you're talking about Genesis and Exodus, and primarily Deuteronomy, I guess.
Right.
But this is the bottom line story that the Bible and that is portrayed in the Bible, that people who believe in the Bible see as actual history. This is the
Right.
the Abraham leaving Mesopotamia and going to the Promised Land, going to Canaan, the Promised Land. This is that whole story, and you're saying that this is something which was created for political gain, for political
Yes.
mileage.
Yes.
That's incredible, because
And this,
I mean, even when I was a kid, I mean, I was never a Christian. I was never a believer in God. I've always been an atheist. But when I was a kid, you sort of read the Bible, or you get the Bible read to you. Most of the time, most people don't actually read the Bible, but those stories always seemed to be quite plausible when I was a child. I didn't really believe in the exaggeration of a lot of the stories in there, but just the core story of the patriarchs' journey to the Promised Land and to Egypt and then back again and things like that just seemed like it. But well, that's probably what happened. But you're saying that none of that would have happened.
no, none of it's true. It's all part of the Reformationist program of Josiah in and around 622 BC to serve his interests, both politically and as a land grab. Even like the supposed united kingdom of David and Solomon was a fiction of Judah. That
Right.
we were at one point one united kingdom, and then after the death of Solomon, then the kingdom fragments into the north and south, and that's just simply not true.
So
And
it's like they're saying we're sort of destined to become one,
yeah,
and it's sort of been written from the
right.
past. It's like we are one big family. We're all joined somehow.
Yeah, and you can see the problems today with the fight between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That the Orthodox and ultra Orthodox Israelis believe that they are entitled, that they are the God-given inheritors of the chosen land, of the chosen people to this land,
Yeah.
and it's all based on a fiction. And they think for this reason they should be entitled to dispossess the Palestinians, and it's all a fiction.
It just that part alone is just quite terrifying when you think that people actually believe this stuff, and there is absolutely zero evidence of this ever happening. This goes, and because I think when we spoke before, I was saying it was Bronze Age stories, and you quite rightly corrected me and said, no, this is not a Bronze Age story, it's an Iron Age story about Bronze Age times.
Right.
And it's that alone is a big misconception, that these are Bronze Age stories in the Bible. They're not Bronze Age stories; they're Iron Age stories
Right.
talking about the Bronze Age. And I think that's incredibly
And
fascinating.
they make a lot of mistakes when they do that. Like they talk about camels back in the Bronze Age, when they are the camel was not domesticated yet in the Bronze Age, but they were, oddly enough, a very key factor in the Assyrian Empire for the trade routes. So again, you see all of these echoes of what's going on in the contemporary time of Josiah being reflected in these stories. In the Bible on Earth, they actually make the point that the whole Exodus narrative is uncannily similar in its characteristics to what's playing out between Pharaohs Necho and Psammetichus and Josiah in their fight to control the trade routes. One of the issues on like the Israel Museum itself, and I believe it was in 2016, their exhibit on the Exodus recognizes the fact that there is no evidence whatsoever, and correspondingly, the exhibit in the museum is an empty room. When it comes to the conquest of Canaan, and the fall of Jericho, Kathleen Kennan, who was an archaeologist who, within the last few decades, I can't remember exactly when she did it, proved that in the time of the conquest of Canaan, which would have been late Bronze Age according to the Bible's dating for it, had fallen in the Middle Bronze Age, and that the walls had already been come down, and the city would have been abandoned by the Late Bronze Age. And you see again, like, and this happens a lot in history, that there's usually some nugget of historical truth that gets embedded into these later legendary tales. So the fall of Jericho was probably in their ancestral lore, and somehow got incorporated into this story. But again, it's an anachronism from the fact that it couldn't have existed at the time.
Yeah, so archaeologically, it could not have fallen at the time they say it fell, because it had already been abandoned for what century?
It's already been abandoned, and the Jews do not exist as a people, or the Israelites do not exist as a culture until the Iron Age. So the Bronze Age collapse is caused by the invasion of the Sea Peoples, and scholars debate where these people come from. They don't really know, but they caused the collapse of the Mycenaean Empire in Greece, the Hittites in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, the collapse of, I think it was the New Kingdom in Egypt, don't quote me on that, and the collapse of these major Canaanite city-states. And so what Israel Finkelstein and Neil Silberman are talking about in the Bible on Earth is, you see in the archaeological record these what we would call Bedouin today, the nomadic sheep and goat herders who are trading with the city-states, are now forced to settle down in the highlands of Canaan and start farming and having permanent settlements. And this is the time when you see an Israelite culture emerge in the archaeological record. So, and here's what's funny with the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict is the Palestinians are the Sea Peoples. So they settle on the coast along Gaza, and at the same time that the Bedouins settle down and become the Israelites, they've both been in the same land for the same exact amount of time. And yet the Israelites try to claim precedence through their own fictional narratives. And it's existentially frustrating, to know the history and sit back. And there's a great editorial cartoon, like the guy lying on the psychiatrist's sofa, that says, those who don't know their history are condemned to repeat it, and those who do know their history are condemned to sit back and watch everyone else repeat it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this whole thing about the Sea People as well. I mean, because I love reading about this. I mean, it's one of my sort of, I don't know, my little background hobbies. I like reading about the rise and fall of civilizations and all that sort of thing. And this whole era is full of stuff that we still don't really know too much about. I mean, there's a lot of conjecture about the Sea People. We hear a lot about that, and you're saying that it's maybe the descendants, or they were descendants of the Palestinians. We've also sort of looking at the concept that they were the Philistines that have been written about quite a lot. Is that your understanding?
The Philistines are the Sea Peoples. So the Sea Peoples came in and they caused all this destruction, and then they settled down on the coast of Gaza and become the Philistines, who are known as the Palestinians today.
Wow. Okay. So also there's parts of the Bible that are sort of culled from older stories. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of it as well? So things like, the story of Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and Genesis.
Yeah, so a lot of that stuff comes from the priestly era, from the post-Babylonian exile era, in the documentary hypothesis they call the priestly source. So the priestly source starts editing and redacting parts of the Bible and merging a lot of these northern and southern traditions. And so things like the Genesis story come about. And one of the things they talk about is, or the scholarship discusses, is I think it was in like mid 1800s, like 1849-ish, that the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian creation story, was discovered in Iraq. And I think it was translated like around 1870, 1880, finally translated. And oddly enough, it parallels Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth, and on day 1, he did this, and on day 2, he did this. And it does the same exact things in exactly the same order. So you got to realize that, the Genesis story comes from Sumeria. The Garden of Eden story comes from the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, as does the story of Noah. The story of Moses being put in a basket and put in the river. That's the story of Sargon of Akkad, the first Sumerian emperor. So there's a lot of this Sumerian literature that is being absorbed into the early Hebrew texts and sort of passed off as their own stories.
Now,
So-
just before we talk any more about this, just so people can place this in, in geography, I guess. Samaria is where exactly?
Right. So Sumer is the same thing as Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia is the Greek word for the land between the rivers. So it's basically modern day Iraq. So where Baghdad is today, Ur is not too far from there. Akkad would not be too far from there. So it's basically Sumer was basically modern Iraq
So
between the
it's
time
from, sort of with the Persian Gulf,
yeah,
upwards.
yeah.
And
So
I guess it's because it was the fertile lands. I suppose it was the Euphrates and the Tigris,
Yeah.
the rivers, basically.
Right. They're farming in the river basin.
Yeah, that whole swathe of lands right up to sort of where Syria is now, the sort of the I guess the west of the east of Syria is now, and then that fertile land sort of peaks around the top of that.
Yeah.
To where I guess I'm just thinking of places where people know, like Aleppo. We've seen Aleppo in the news quite a lot. So all the way arcing round to where Aleppo is, and then down towards where Israel is now.
Yeah,
where Canaan,
Right.
So it's just trying to sort of get it in some sort of perspective where we're actually talking. It's really good if you're listening to this on a podcast to maybe just grab a map or go onto Google Maps or something and just have a look at the area, because it's quite good to visualize exactly where we're talking about. So we've got the things like the Genesis story that comes from Samaria. What sort of time would that been? Those stories, when would that have happened?
So the post-exile era starts around, I want to say 522 BCE ish. I can't remember exactly when the Persians released them from Babylonian captivity, but it would have been around 522 BCE, and that's sort of when the first wave of exiles would have returned to Jerusalem. But interestingly, not all of them did. A lot of them stayed in the region. I believe Persian Jews were, up until the 79 Iranian Revolution, Persian Jews were like the largest diaspora community who basically had stayed in the region for 2,500 years. Some people may have heard of the Babylonian Talmud, because it's being written by the Jews that are living in ancient Babylon, in the territories that would correspond with ancient Babylon. So the priestly era begins around 500. Ezra, who's widely considered to be either the first or one of the major redactors of the Bible, is around 450 BCE, and so that's when they're starting to bring in a lot of these stories of incorporating these stories. And of course, the exiles had been living in and amongst the Sumerians, or at the time the Babylonians. So they're going to then, of course, be coming into contact with these stories, living in that culture. The same thing happens. So the Persians, or Cyrus the Great was the one who released them, and contemporaneously, the Persian ideals of dualism are also absorbed into Judaism. And this is where you start to see Judaism shift again, where Satan begins to emerge in the literature as a separate being. Because in Persian Zoroastrian dualism, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Dualism is all about light, dark, good, bad, opposing opposites. And so within Judaism, you begin to see this separation between God and Satan where you can't blame God for evil in the world. So Satan becomes what they call in the book called the birth of Satan, a theological coping mechanism, that Satan becomes the screen upon which evil is portrayed, so it can take the blame off of God. And that's a very Persian concept that is borrowed from the Jews who are exposed to it, as well as to being exposed to all the Babylonians. Yale professor John Collins talks about how, and I've got the reference here, let me just pull it up so I get it right, talks about the Exodus story and the Passover. And let me read. It says, the Passover story celebration is found only in the priestly source. Just as the priestly source grounds the Sabbath in the creation story, so it grounds the Passover in the story of the Exodus. The Passover was probably originally a rite of spring practiced by shepherds. In early Israel, it was a family festival. The celebration was changed by the reform of King Josiah into a pilgrimage festival to be celebrated at the central sanctuary in Jerusalem, and was combined with the festival of the unleavened bread. So again, you see this priestly source is merging older traditions and grounding. So like he says, they ground the Sabbath in the creation story, they ground the Passover in the Exodus, which had, previously Passover was a spring rite. It was nothing to do with the Exodus, but they find a way to merge these things together in their reimagining of their great epic saga.
Because I mean, even the story of Passover, when I read that, I read this when I was probably about sort of 15 or 16 or something, so a long time ago. But that story sort of disgusted me in a little way, because it's like, it's this whole thing about sort of God. This is the story about God killing the firstborn of the people of Egypt and all that sort of thing. And if you put lamb's blood on the door, then God would pass over that house. And that's really the whole idea of it. So, everybody should be killing lambs. So kill loads of animals.
Well, I mean, he's indiscriminately killing the firstborn, innocent firstborn Egyptian children. That's just genocide.
Yeah, no, this is why I never really got it. I never really got the idea that why the people around me were telling me that they believed in this. People I trusted. My family, people in authority were telling me that this is true. And when I actually read the Bible, and this is not something I think that many kids do, and I don't think many people do, to be honest. But when I actually read it, it was story after story after story, and I was thinking, I don't like this God. I don't like these people. I don't like what they're doing. I don't like their attitude to life. I think they're immoral. I think the God is, I don't know, just it's like he's meant to be all-seeing but doesn't see anything. It's a bit like the story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
You can eat anything you want, but don't touch that tree. I'm just going to go over here for a minute. I can't see you, so you can do what you like. Meant to be all-seeing but can't see anything. Blames everybody else, and this is one of the reasons why it just fascinates me why people believe all this stuff and follow it to the letter. Sometimes, literally believe it. You're talking about evangelicals. These are the people that, I mean, up till recently, we now obviously Trump's out of office now, but there's been a sort of a rise in this evangelical fervor within that administration. I mean, it's just mind blowing. But let's talk a little bit about some of those stories. So we've got the stories of Genesis. Tell us a little bit about sort of the origins of the story of Adam and Eve and the story of Gilgamesh and Noah and all that sort of thing.
So both the Adam and Eve and Noah story come from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
In the original Adam and Eve story, to call it that, there's no connotations of evil. Joseph Campbell does a really phenomenal job of describing it in his documentary, The Power of Myth, with Bill Moyers, which people haven't seen. It's 30, 40 years old now. I think it came out like in 1988. But it's still worth watching. It's really good. And he talks about how the garden is the serpent's place. The character of Eve is a goddess who's welcoming the visiting male of Adam, and the serpent does not have any references to it being evil. And if you look at these Eastern ideals, the serpent is highly regarded in Hinduism, probably to some extent in Buddhism. Campbell's got a fantastic quote in one of his books. I can't remember the title of the book at the moment, where he's comparing the imagery of the tree and the serpent with Adam and Eve to that image of a Buddha sitting under the tree, and there's the cobra has come up with the hood protecting him, and the tree behind him, and he's comparing this comparative imagery in the two, and the Adam and Eve story is a tale of naughty children, whereas the tale of Buddha is of a self-sufficient, responsible adult. And I just thought I'd never really thought about the comparative imagery before of the tree and the serpent that's common in both the Adam and Eve story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in the Buddha legend. So I thought it was quite interesting. I just thought.
Where does the Gilgamesh stories come from? Where does that actually originate?
Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh, so it's the oldest surviving written epic, but it itself is based on an even older non-surviving epic known as the Epic of Atrahasis. Right. I don't know what the dates are on that. So you're looking at roughly 2,000 years preceding the incorporation by the priestly source of these stories into the Hebrew Bible, because these stories are coming from, I think it's around, Campbell mentions like there's seals from like 3,500 BC that have the tail of the serpent in the garden and the goddess. There's about a 2,000 year history there before the Hebrews get it, that it's surviving in Sumerian culture.
I love all this. We are going to do more of this, Jason, because it is absolutely amazing. As you say, we're going to be putting some links in so people can actually sort of follow some of this stuff. We're going to be on YouTube with this, and we're also going to be on the podcast with this. So if anybody's got any questions, anybody wants to talk about this, any bits of information that you want out of this, then let us know, and we're going to do some more of this. So for now, Jason, brilliant. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. This stuff is so fascinating to me. I love it so much. And I know that loads of other people talk about this sort of stuff all the time. So hopefully we'll do a bit more of this. But until next time, Jason, thank you very, very much.
And thank you for having me on. And I hope the people listening and watching found it useful and informative. And I look forward, as Andy says, if you have some questions, by all means, let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them for you on our future shows.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
84% of the 7.6 billion people on our planet are religious. Religious people follow dozens of religions and tens of thousands of denominations. The larger 18 religions have more than 1 million followers each, with the largest, Christianity, boasting almost 2.4 billion followers. These religions differ so much that they cannot all be true, but they could all be false. They are all believed on faith by people who are utterly convinced they are true, valuable, and endorsed by their God. What could go wrong? Unfortunately, a lot could go wrong, and it does. We see examples daily. We see violence erupting between rival religious groups. We see people engaging in violence to promote their religion and find favor with their God. We see gay people being beaten, persecuted, and even executed. We see religious minorities and non-believers being marginalized, criminalized, and attacked. We see governments and religions working hand in hand to impose religious values on every citizen. We see religious groups conspiring to have schools teach religious beliefs as science, and to deny science that conflicts with religious beliefs. It doesn't have to be this way. At Atheist Alliance International, we say there should be a strict separation between religion and state. The state should serve all its citizens equally and should not favour any religion. We say governments should protect freedom of conscience and freedom of speech, not deny them. People should be free to change their religion or have no religion. People should be free to openly express their opinions on any religion. Education should be secular and based on reason and science. Governments should promote human rights based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In any conflict between religious beliefs and human rights must take priority. Atheist Alliance International does not seek to deny people the freedom to hold and enjoy their religious beliefs. Freedom of religion is a basic human right. We seek to eradicate the abuse of religious power, to make the world a safe place for people with no religious beliefs, and a better place for everyone. There is a very long way to go. Our project is multi-generational, but we are making a difference today. We campaign on the international stage, at the United Nations and the Council of Europe, and we help atheists and secular groups anywhere in the world. We seek to normalize atheism through education and publicity. Religious people need to understand what atheism is, why it is intellectually honorable, and why there is no reason to fear it. We support critical thinking and respect for evidence. Faith-based thinking leads to closed minds and can result in bigotry, distrust, and hatred. We promote critical thinking programs and we encourage open dialogue. We aim to introduce an atheist Bill of Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights does not adequately protect atheists. We anticipate intense opposition from religions and religiously affiliated governments, but this is on our agenda and we will make it happen. If you agree with our aims, why not help? You can become a member or a volunteer, or you can donate. If you are part of an atheist group, become an affiliate. We will be stronger together. You'll find everything you need on our website.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. I'm Andy Phillips, and don't forget we're risen apes, not fallen angels. See you next time.